Welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast, where we talk about struggles and celebrations that leaders and entrepreneurs experience on their journey to success. I'm your host, Kristina, and I'm passionate about helping you achieve massive amounts of success at work and at home. We'll talk about all things people and organizational wellness, share relatable stories, and feature insightful guests because quality people and processes are at the heart of every success story. Ready to learn, grow, and have fun? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Business Building Blocks podcast. I'm your host, Kristina Schmitt. Today is episode 2 of our leadership model series. So last week we talked about the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and results model. So this model is, I always say it's like the only model you'll ever need. However, these ones are also extremely helpful to keep in your brain, but everything is almost based on this concept of that we have thoughts and beliefs. We're going to feel some emotions about those thoughts and beliefs, and they're going to cause us to behave a certain way. And that behavior will result in a very, maybe certain result. And if we want to make changes in those results, the best thing we can do is change our thoughts. We can, white knuckle those behaviors sometimes, but sometimes those thoughts get in the way. And it's sometimes very even subconscious. So today we're going to talk about a model that I've always called the ABC model. And when I start talking about it, you're going to say, well, that's of course that. But when you start to really keep that in your mind, just like with all of these models, it is super helpful to keep these in your brain. When you keep this in your brain, and then you start to say, well, I'm not getting the results that I want. So again, our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, results. I'm not getting the result that I want. Where is it breaking down? This helps us to understand where it's broken down and then helps us to take an action to improve that result. So let's get into the model. So ABC, so it sounds fun. What it stands for is antecedent, behavior, consequences. So antecedent is one of those funny words that we don't use very often. But once you get it in your brain, what it means, it's like, oh, yes, that word. So antecedent is actually the thing before. So it is in terms of when our own minds, it's those thoughts, or when we're talking about other people, it's the expectation we've set, the policy we've put in place, the rules we've set out. It's that thing that comes before the behavior. So it is the standard that they're expected or that we expect. So it's that expectation. So then once you've set this, now there are behaviors. There are observable and sometimes unobservable, but there are behaviors. So those are typically when we're in a leadership setting, you'll say, we've set the rule. Now I'm observing the behavior to see if people follow the rule. Now, if you've ever been anywhere, people don't just follow rules because we've told them to. Ultimately, it's the consequence or the C that makes them follow the rule. So when we're looking to enforce a rule or enforce a specific line of behaviors, which are essentially just the rules, us following the rules, then we have to have a consequence of sorts. Now, for some reason in maybe it's the Western society, I'm not really sure, but we think of consequence as a bad thing. So we think of a reprimand, we think of a spanking, or we think of something that is more of a punishment. Really, the consequence is anything. If we do anything, if we have any kind of behavior, there is a consequence to that behavior. Sometimes the consequence is nothing, which can be seen as a positive thing or a negative thing. So let's take, for example, somebody comes in late. They have a start time. The antecedent is work starts at 7 a.m. The behavior is they show up every single day at 7:03 or 7:05, or maybe they get to their workstation at 7:03, 7:05, and they don't start up until 7:08. And so that's the behavior. Now, the consequence of that behavior could be that every time it happens, somebody speaks to them. And then it could be that, after they get spoken to once, then they get, first written warning, second one, so they have repeated escalating consequences. But more often than we hope to see, what they get from that behavior is no consequence or nothing happens, which is now a benefit. So I can continue to stroll into my workstation and start it up late and nothing happens. So that's a positive consequence, which then reinforces the behavior that I am doing. And in the long term of it actually undermines your antecedent, which again, if you've been around, if we continue to undermine our antecedents, or our rules or our expectations, then our expectations begin to mean nothing. Our yes doesn't mean yes. Our no doesn't mean no. Our do this on time or do this the way I tell you means nothing because of that consequence. So when we are leading, when really in any situation, even if you're trying to work with peers differently, when we're doing these things, we have to make sure that our consequences that we set, so our behaviors, align with the antecedent or the behaviors that we want to see. So let's break this down. What I see a lot in a lot of organizations, or really with a lot of leaders, because they're not really comfortable with the consequence side of things, what they do is they set an antecedent, they set a rule, they set a policy expectation, whatever it is, and they observe that the behavior is not what they wanted. It's not what they expected. They expected people to, do A, then B, then C, then D. What they're seeing is that people are doing A, then C, then B, and then falling off and doing E, doing something else completely different. So they're seeing a different behavior than what they want. And then what they do is they reset the antecedent. They redo the rule or the expectation, either to meet the behavior that is actually happening or to something else in hopes that it'll work better for people. Well, there is a place for that. If we've set something and we've set it, we need to follow up with whatever the consequence is. Otherwise, we might as well not say it. We might as well say, do what you want and we'll go with it. The better way, if you're tending to go A, B, A, B, so I set an antecedent, I do a behavior, and then I redo my antecedent because the behaviors aren't meeting what I wanted. If you're tending to do that, your best bet and really the best change management activity is to bring the people in that are going to be doing the thing. So they're going to be following the rules or they're going to be following the process, and have them help you map it out. You give certain guidelines and metrics that need to be met, but you have them create it. So then there's just a little bit more buy-in to the antecedent. And now when you come together and you say, okay, I'm observing this behavior that is or is not what I want, then rather than thinking, oh, I should reset the antecedent because maybe it wasn't the right one, then you say, well, we agreed to this. We agreed to this expectation, correct? Yes, we did. And I'm observing this. Okay, what are you going to do? What are we going to do about it? We set an action or the consequence. So ultimately, the consequence of the behavior not aligning with the antecedent is that conversation. It's that conversation that is had. Or even the consequence of the behavior aligning with the antecedent, it is also a consequence. And that consequence is a good thing. That consequence is that recognition of, I see that you did the behavior like we wanted. Awesome. So that in itself is a consequence as well. And I think that a lot of times we get afraid of that word consequence because it feels bad. It feels like behavior not aligning, must reprimand. Behavior not aligning, must reprimand. And it's not always that. And in fact, they say you get more flies with honey, but you're actually going to get a bigger boom if you also, or maybe even 2 or 3 times as much, give the positive consequence of, hey, that was a great thing you did. You followed the thing that we said, and it's new, and I know it's hard, and you're doing it. So amazing. Keep it up. When we can reinforce the behaviors that we want with a consequence, we're locking those behaviors in. We're ensuring that they're going to happen. So now let's take a broader look of this. So this ABC model, when we take it back to the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, results, we might tend to think that the antecedent is the thought part. But what is actually in that thought part is what people think the consequence will be. So you might set an antecedent that has some effect, but what they're seeing, what they think is like, okay, well, they're telling me this. I can continue to do this, and my thought patterns, my brain is telling me they're probably not going to check up on it. So I can continue to do it as I've always done it. Our brains are extremely powerful, but they're also very busy. And their jobs are, one of their brain's major jobs are to conserve energy. And they do that by doing routines and doing things in the same pattern that they've always done it. So asking your brain to change takes a lot of energy and work. So if your brain believes that the consequence is going to be nothing, then it's going to lock in the fact that you're not going to change. So leaders who are afraid of the consequence, whether they're giving the positive reinforcement or the negative reinforcement, we'll say, or what they might think is a reprimand, whether they're having a constructive feedback conversation or a recognition conversation, the team will already have in their brains a preconceived notion of what's actually going to happen. And that's going to drive the behavior. So if you're struggling with that C part of this ABC model, start with something. So here's your practical for today. I want you to come up with some rule, policy, or procedure, something that you're going to start sticking with. If maybe you've got this habit. So you're going to come up, what is the one thing I'm going to really start to hammer on? And come up with, okay, what is the behavior I really, really want to see? So you're going to set out that antecedent. So basically you can say, hey, line in the sand, we've been lax here. We're not going to be lax here anymore. So antecedent set. Now observe behaviors. It can be extremely helpful, particularly if you're struggling in this area. It can be extremely helpful for you to lock into your mind very specifically, what behaviors do I want? I want to see people following this policy. What is that going to look like? Okay, they're going to be sending an email at this time. They're going to be filling out this form at this time. They're going to be doing these things around these time frames. So what you're doing is you're locking into your mind where and when and kind of what people are going to be doing if they're doing it right. And now you can purposely look for that behavior. So you can look for the good things. You can say, hey, I'm observing you doing this correctly the way we said. Thank you for that. Awesome. Keep it up. Great example to everyone else. So now you've given them yay reinforcement for the consequence. And you can also look in your mind for the things that deviate from that. So maybe somebody should be at a certain place at a certain time and they're not there. So you can say, I observed you were not there when you should have been. What happened? So now you're starting to reinforce the behaviors you want and modify the behaviors you don't want. And that is in essence the consequences that we want to have for these behaviors. So very simple model and very powerful when we take a step back and we say, my job as a leader is to have consistent consequences and to stick to that align with my antecedents that I've set. Okay, we are not meant to be doing A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B. We are meant to do A, B, C, B, C, B, C, B, C, right? And that if we do that, then when we lay out an A, we may have to do less BC work as we get more consistent with it. Because again, when people think, so our thoughts, when those thoughts believe that either the consequence is going to be nothing or the consequence is going to be sporadic or unpredictable, that's going to change how they behave. So the unpredictable either says, no, they don't mean it anyway. I might get yelled at once, but then it doesn't mean anything. Or it might put them into a state of unrest and unsettledness, which then now they're not going to act in their best bet, and they're not going to take risks. They're not going to problem solve proactively like we want them to, and they're probably not going to be achieving their best, because what we want people to feel is safe and safe enough to take a risk, that they're not going to get reprimanded or yelled at because the boss is having a bad day, but that they're going to be supported and educated and helped if they're struggling, or helped if they've done something that was a good positive risk and it maybe went awry, right? They're going to be rewarded for that risk because it was something we wanted them to do, and then do better for us all in the long run. So again, this model, very straightforward, but very powerful, especially when we keep in mind that our BC routine needs to be consistent and it needs to be aligned with the antecedent. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please like it, share it with a friend, give them this quick win, this quick little practical thing that they can go away and they can go do and get their teams operating the way that they want them to. So I will see you on the next episode of the Business Building Blocks podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Building Blocks podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. If you found value in our conversation, please leave a quick review, like, or share. It helps us reach more amazing listeners like you. For more resources and insights, visit KristinaSchmitt.ca, where you can find tools and support to empower your leadership journey. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.